Florida is weird. It's America's most deeply southern state, yet it doesn't feel anything like the South. Honestly, outside of the Panhandle, Florida doesn't share much in culture, economics, or population with its southeastern surrounding states. Of course, the Panhandle is a lot like southeastern Alabama and southern Georgia though, especially in Florida's capital city of Tallahassee. But while the same could be said about Jacksonville, which is sort of Panhandle adjacent, it couldn't be said about other major Florida cities like Orlando, Tampa, or Miami. And while Jacksonville is technically the biggest city in the state, with major amenities, sports franchises, tall buildings, and companies like CSX, Fanatics, and AEW all headquartered there, Jacksonville isn't part of this golden triangle that runs from Orlando to Miami and over to Tampa, when the Florida Triangle holds its most noteworthy cities. But Florida is a lot more than just its most recognizable and not so recognizable cities anyway, because Florida is, perhaps, the strangest state in all of the US. Let me explain. Florida, which has always struggled with flooding and is surrounded by 1,200 miles of coastline spanning the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, somehow faces catastrophic water shortages. Florida, with its booming economy, which hardly benefits its general public, has a consumer confidence rating that looks more like the Great Recession than the dot-com era. It was the fastest growing US state last year, and yet it hit a multi-decade low in natural growth at that same time, as 64% of the residents there came from other states, and despite the headlines, everybody isn't moving to Florida. It's just that millions of retirees and part-time residents from other states and countries are. That's how 7 of America's 10 oldest counties came to be located in Florida. So while the million-plus people that moved there last year may be more newsworthy, it's also worth mentioning that 500,000 actually left, with much of the outward migration there coming from young people and working families, when the Florida economy is arguably based too heavily on the low-paying tourism, retail, and agricultural sectors, with folks leaving pockets of the state from the far southwestern corners of Miami-Dade County to the northwestern tip of Pensacola. While a major portion of incoming residents and investments are coming from just a few of America's most costly states, breaking supply and demand, as Florida median wages are completely out of step with median home prices that have toppled $400,000. When the statewide median household income is just $67,000. That is to say, Florida is booming, but only for the few, while everyone else struggles with all the success. But even those Florida fortunes are more precarious than some of these headlines would suggest. And it hasn't been all that long since Florida's entire economy was grappling with devastation. Back when the bubble bursted there, as the dot-com rise ended, and the 2008 housing crisis drove millions of Americans into poverty.
As to getting out of here, we're not sure when that will happen. It all depends on whether we can start getting some extra money coming in. So one of these could get a little more hours, and we can start to save some money.
A disproportionate amount of that pain happened in Florida, where many residents were never able to recover, even as rising tides in recent years should have raised more boats. Instead, staggering inequality there has left millions of Floridians struggling paycheck to paycheck in a state with minimal unemployment but awful underemployment. So while Walmart being Florida's top employer isn't quite unique, it does go away in showing how far costs and wages have split from reality there. But it isn't just Walmart. Disney is Florida's second largest employer, despite it being headquartered in California, with Disney operating its highly profitable, but typically lower-wage theme park centerpiece in Florida, while many of its best-paying jobs are located over in Burbank. When Publix is the only top 10 Florida employer that isn't either headquartered elsewhere or government-funded. That's fairly uncommon, but it isn't what I would call weird, unless you consider that Florida is one of America's biggest economic powerhouses, making Florida's struggle to keep dollars local in such a powerful economy more than a little strange, but that's Florida in general. As decades of attracting retirees and out-of-state residents buying second and third homes on the beach has left few homes for local Florida families, which are in high demand as companies like Walmart and Amazon continue growing across the state. It's also how Florida came to be covered in retirement communities like the Villages. Though if we're being honest here, there's really no other place like the Florida Villages, which function as an age-restricted Florida city housing nearly 80,000 senior residents, offering local restaurants, services, healthcare, and entertainment, much like a small-sized city, while being set up as a mere census-designated place. A place wrought with problematic geography and a chaotic social environment. But communities like the Villages drive the kind of growth that Florida depends on, as the state would have lost nearly 1,300 residents last year naturally had more than 1 million people not moved there. Of course, this strange phenomenon, where Florida is overpopulated despite its natural population dwindling, means very little when nearly 1,300 people move in every single day. However, Florida's problematic geography is a whole story in and of itself, with development there being much more complex and expensive because of it. That's because good property isn't easy to come by, and Florida's landmass isn't prime for construction, making building out and building up costly. Something compounded by the shortage of construction workers there, and that's to say nothing of Florida's environment and climate concerns, which place even greater pressure on the state. With weather-related and environmental threats constantly complicating Florida housing and marketplaces, leading to underdevelopment, high building costs, massive sprawl, overcrowding, difficult planning, and a necessity for state-supplemented property insurance. In a state where growth has become almost unavoidable, even with important indicators like inequality and poverty rising as it goes. It's bad luck, bad geography, national headwinds, and international trends, but mostly, it's Florida. Not that Florida is all bad. No, Florida is America's most beachy state, arguably a natural paradise, and it creates new millionaires like no place else. It's been called the new Silicon Valley, the new Wall Street, and even America's future, with all of these companies choosing to invest heavily in cities like Tampa, Miami, and Orlando, while Florida has already surpassed New York in terms of population and been touted as America's most pro-business state. But when so little of Florida's success has actually improved life for the folks that keep the state running and its economy booming, you end up with a state always in a state of change where growth is exponential while quality of life just isn't.